Hi, good evening guys. My name is Ajay and welcome back to this new video, right? This video will be talking about how we can actually control the pivot slicers by using the Excel VBA. Now I tell you what, if you have been working in Excel day and night, all the time you make the dashboards, you use the pivots, you know what I'm talking about. Now, for example, you have two different data sources and from those two data points, you have created two different pivots. So obviously you will have two different slicers, right? Let's say you have a slicer country, right? Each slicer for, your this individual data. So you have two slicers for two different pivots because they are coming from a different data. Now, if you select, let's say USA or India or any country in one slicer, the other slicer will never change because that is coming from a different data source. How can you do that? Thanks to Debbie who has emailed me this last week, and she said that she tried hard, she checked on the internet, she did whatever she could, but she couldn't find the solution, and it's troubling her from almost a week now. And you can take this the entire code from the video comment section. Let me know what you feel about this video and I'll wait for your genuine comments also, guys.
Okay, so guys, let's quickly start this. First of all, let us understand the problem, what I'm talking about, and then how we can actually go and create a code for this. Okay, are you with me? Can we immediately start? So this is all about the pivot and playing with the slicers, right? And the slicers are the backbone of pivot dashboards, you know that, right? So the thing is, this is your data 1 and this is a data 2. Now one thing which is very important, because we are talking about here intra-connecting. One slicer should be connected with the another slicer using VBA, so definitely there has to be something common, right? A common header. So here we have a region. These are our Indian states, our country states, right? And this is also I have a country state, and this is our COVID data. How many active cases, how many deaths, how many people have been discharged. And here you have a different data. Here you have a data as per the age, but that is not important here. Now the first thing is, let us quickly go and create a pivot on this. I go in the insert and I create the pivot table. First of all, I want to create a pivot table. We go and create the pivot table in the new worksheet, right? Now let's say we want here the region and we want to see the active cases or whatever you want to see. Okay, now once you have this, the thing is that if let's say we want to create a slicer, okay, we want to create a slicer. So how do you create the slicer? You go in the insert and then you click on the slicer, and then we choose the slicer as a region, right? Now the benefit of the slicer is that anytime if I select any region from here, any state from here, my filter will go and do the results according to the selected item. Correct? Let me remove the filter. Now you see the problem is that if I go and create, let's say, another pivot, for example, but that is a different data, not the same data, because if you are creating a slicer using the same data, then you will not have this problem. Which problem? Now I create a pivot here, for example, right? Now you can create this pivot anywhere, for example, but right now I'm just going to create this pivot in the same Excel sheet. Okay, so let's quickly first of all click on the pivot table. Existing worksheet, I have an existing worksheet, the same sheet, sheet 4, and let's say I go and create the pivot over here, right? Now you see it is a common sense that once I start creating the region from here, let's say we want here these two age results according to these two age groups. Now if you click on any of the state, right, only this will be filtered, only this will actually work according to this selection, because this is a different pivot table. This pivot is different. When I say different, I mean that this is using a different data. If it is created on the same database, then yes, this slicer would have got the control by default. And this is where a lot of people actually face challenge, because they do not know VBA, right? Now if you know VBA, if you do not know VBA, it's okay. The code is very simple. You just need to copy and paste this on your this exact location. You can obviously take this code and just copy and paste it on the exact, where I'm going to tell you, and just a little bit of changes, modification you can do. But first of all, understand now how we can do the, overcome this type of a situation challenge. Now we have to create here also one slicer, right? Since I have selected this pivot, so the slicer will be created for this pivot table, right? So let's quickly create the slicer, and again I'm going to use the region because this is what we need, obviously, because if the slicers are different, then you cannot go and connect them, right? Because the logic is that if I select any state here, we will go and run the loop in this slicer, and we will see that if we have this value over here, and if it is, then immediately go and select that. Okay, this is the point, right? So this is a different slicer, and if I select here now, click here, this will be selected, right? And this won't be, and we want to intra-connect them. Okay, now how to do this? Now understand one thing. So generally when you write the macros, people go and you go and click on the buttons, right? And then the macro fires. But here we need something on the auto mode, which is what? If I select anything in this slicer or this slicer, let's take one slicer. Okay, if I select this slicer, then whatever I have selected, that should automatically, my macro should run. My macro should not wait for me. It should immediately run, and it should select that specific region in this pivot also, in this slicer also. How are we going to do that? We will take the help of VBA events. So we have an event in VBA which is a pivot update. So we can say that anytime any update happens in this pivot, right, then immediately go and run the loop and check what the user has selected, and same thing you have to show this here. You have to select this here. So what you have to do, first of all, check your sheet, because this is an event. Event means self-triggered macros. So we are going to run a self-triggered macro, a macro which automatically fires the moment it finds my condition has met. And what is a condition? Condition is anytime if the update happens in this pivot, right? This is what we want to actually do. Very interesting scenario. Okay, now this is a sheet 4. You can give it a name, whatever you want. Okay, but I just keep it as it is. We will go in the developer tab, we will go in the Visual Basic, and here we will simply start writing the code. But we will go and write the code in this sheet. Remember that, the sheet 4. Okay, now this is where we actually go and write the event. So I select this. Once you have selected this, go and select the worksheet. By default, these events will appear. If you have even a basic idea about VBA, you know what I'm talking, right? But even if you don't, just follow the steps. Here, just go and find out where is the pivot table update event. You will all find this event in your Excel. Doesn't matter which version you are using, 2010, 2013, 2016, Office 365 or whatever, right? So we go and select this. The moment I've selected this, I don't need this event. I delete this. This is where we have to work. Now understand what it says. This says that the moment I have the pivot table update happening in the sheet where I have written this code, which is sheet 4, I will immediately go and fire the code. Now you see, I put the break code. I'll show you. If I select any state from here, you see what happens. If I select this, immediately your pivot updates, you know that, right? And look at this. The event will fire immediately, and this is where we have to go and run all those loops, right? Now let me just go and clear this again. Again, this will fire because again you are updating the pivot, obviously. So I just go and reset this. Now before you ask me, so is this related to this pivot only? No, we have not mentioned here any pivot table name. That you can do, which is out of the syllabus. I mean, I'm not going to do that, but I'll tell you that's very simple. You just need to write if the pivot name is this, then don't run this. If the pivot table is this, then do run. In case if you want this to be even to run on some specific pivot. But right now, look at this. I'm going to select this state from here and see again this is running. You got the point, right? So as far as the pivots are concerned in this sheet, any pivot if you update, this event will fire. So in the last of this code, I'll tell you how you can just go and if you want to restrict this to only one pivot, that look, if this pivot updates only, then I want to fire the macro. Otherwise, I don't want to fire. Well, that's very easy. But let's first do the important part. Okay, let me reset this. Now this event will keep on firing, so I just go in for the time being, comment this. Okay, now what is the plan? Look at this. As I said that even if you do not know the VB, it's okay. But I want to give you a layout. I want to give you the the overall what we are going to do. Let us understand this. Okay, you see, this is a pivot. We know that, right? What is the name of this pivot table? Well, you know that how to find out the name. This is called the PivotTable 5, right? So I go and simply go and write the name for over here just for your help. Okay, now what is a slicer name? Do you know the slicers also have name? Slicers also have names, right? How to go and check the name of the slicer? Simply click on the slicer. Okay, when you click on the slicer, you have to go in the slicer setting, right? And this is the name, slicer underscore region. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to write here slicer underscore region. This is the name of this slicer. What is the name of this slicer? Let's quickly go in this slicer setting, and this is slicer underscore region 1. Okay, so it's the same name, but now it's actually a 1, right? Obviously both can't be same. What is the name of this pivot? Well, I guess this must be PivotTable 6 because this was PivotTable 5, but we have to check. Okay, so there we go. I copy this and I just go and paste it here. Okay, now see, you have PivotTable 6 connected with this slicer and you have PivotTable 5 connected with this slicer, right? Now understand the structure. So what happens now, we have to go and work on this slicer, let's say, right? And you know the name of the slicer now, correct? So what you will do, you will say that, okay, this slicer, okay, the items in this slicer, what are those items? I want to check what are those items, and in those items, are they selected? If any of the item is selected or not, right? And if it is selected, then we want to go and stop there. We want to capture that value. This is the first thing you will do, right? Now how to check that what are the items in the slicer, and the second, which one is selected? There are two things, guys. There are two things. How to check how many items we have here, because then you can run the loop. Is this selected? Is this selected? Is this selected? The moment I find this selected, immediately we will exit from the loop, because we believe that user will only select one item at a time. We are talking about this situation, right? So first thing which you have to do is, when you go here in your code, you will go and define first of all your slicer, and then the next thing you will go and define is your slicer item. There are two things. Item is a smaller term, slicer is a bigger term, right? Because you see, items, first you have a slicer, right? And in that slicer you have actually the slicer items, which are basically your these states, region, isn't it, right? So we have to first define two things. Okay, so first thing is that you go and define your first of a slicer. Okay, so we will go and say that, okay, my slicer 1, let's say SLC1. okay, we are going to use a class for this which is called SlicerCache. Okay, now we use this class only when we have to deal with the slicers. As simple as that, because class is a blueprint of your object. Every programming language has multiple classes, right? The more classes you have, that means the more variety of objects you have and the more work you can do, and that is a simply decides the future of that programming language. So to work with the slicers, we can use this class. Okay, so we have to define that which slicer we are talking about, so that we can run the loop inside that slicer. So for that, it's very simple. Just go and write here this workbook. This workbook means this exactly the coding file, and here we will use the SlicerCache, right, plural, and then you have to go and give the name of that slicer. Okay, so for us the name is actually slicer region, if you remember, and that's the reason I was actually finding the name. So now this is okay. I have defined that, okay, this is the slicer I have to target, but what about the items inside this slicer? Do we not need to access them? Yes, for that we go and use SlicerItem. Okay, so I'm just going to use slicer, let's say item, in this way. As now what you are going to use, you're going to actually use a class called SlicerItem. Make sense, right? Now, since I'm not talking about any specific item in this, I do not know which one is selected, so you can't use the set word here. We will go and run the loop, collection loop, right? We will say that for each of my slicer item, right, inside my slicer, which slicer? Slicer1, okay, and then I'm just going to loop through all the slicers items, okay, this way. Now this actually should start giving me the name of all those items available in that specific slicer, which is what? Which is this. So what name, the name has to be is going to play an important role here. So here I will simply say slicer item. Let's say I need the name, right? So if I need the name, then can we first of all quickly go and check if this is actually working or not? I put the breakcode here. I click here, let's say a state, and now we should be able to see all the regions. And look at this, Andaman and Nicobar, and then you have Andhra Pradesh, and then you have Bihar. Oh wow, fantastic. So we are able to loop through all the states of our country, or whatever data you have, right? This is what we needed it. I reset the code. We just want to store this value. Okay, so I want to say store the value. Which value? Not this value. For the time being, let's simply go and use the store as string. We will store the selected item, not exactly all the items. This is the first thing. Now I want to store the selected item, so how do I know which specific item is selected? Well, for that, here we will write the loop. We will write the if condition. Okay, every time the slicer item is going to come, so we will say that if that is selected or not. So we will say that, look, if in my slicer1, this object slicer, right, if here, let's quickly go and use the slicer item, we will go and use the item this, and here we will use the specific that slicer item here, SLC item not name, right, item.name, like this. If this is selected, then what? Then I just want to capture that, right? And that's very easy. So we will use the store variable and we will say that, okay, I'm going to capture that. And I'm going to, after capturing the name, I don't want to waste my time, right? We will immediately exit from the loop. Otherwise your loop will keep on, moving further till the time it don't find the right answer. It don't find that, what is exactly selected. So this is the first collection loop, and through this we are actually capturing what you have selected here, because if you know what you have selected here, then you can go and check where exactly is this state available in this region, and the moment you find it, you just need to go and select that. You just need to make that visible, and rest all should be invisible or deselected, whatever you want to call it. Now once we have captured the what we have selected, now here we will start another loop, because this time now we will see that what regions we have in this slicer, and the moment this is found here, we will go and select that. So again, the same collection loop, we have to go and run it, but the thing is, this time your slicer is going to be a different, correct or not, right? So you can define the slicer here, or you can define here, it's up to you, but understanding the chronology of the system, I'll go and write it here so that when you go and read this code, it makes a sense to you. So here we have a slicer 2, and this slicer, if you remember, the name was, I think, slicer underscore region 1, right? This is very important. Okay, so again we will start writing the loop here. I quickly copy this and I paste it here. Okay, this time this is actually the slicer. Okay, just a comment for you. So here, first of all, you have to go and change this to 2, correct or not, right? And then we will go and simply delete this for the time being, and we will now start running the loop here, and we will say that, okay, so where is my slicer 2 items? Let me go through them. Let me check if this is equals to that store value, the one we have selected. You know that we have already captured that. We have captured that here, right, in the store. Okay, now many times when I teach this also in my classes, students often ask me, then why didn't you change this? It's all about the fundamentals. You don't have to create a separate copy for this slice item. I mean, you can say slice underscore item 2, then you have to define that separately, but it is not required. Why? Because this is simply dependent upon this, what you go and write it here. When in this above line, when we were actually writing this slice SLC underscore item, this will actually going inside this. You know that we have not used any set keyword for this item. This is the reason, because it is not specific. So what you write here, collection loop actually loop through that specific object. So when I say all the slicer items where in this actually the slicer, which is slicer region, when I say that, okay, I want to get all the items, but where? In this slicer 2, which is what? Which is this one. You understood the concept? Okay, so we can reuse this. Okay, now once this is done, we will simply say that, okay, so now the slicer item name, because the collection loop, you know, will give me the names of all the items available in this slicer, right, one by one, this one, right? So we have to see that where exactly we have got that, the store. The moment I find that, I want to go and, you know, immediately say that now this has to be selected. This has to be selected, which is a part of slicer 2. So you will go and start writing here again the same thing, slicer 2. Okay, and in this we will go and say that slicer items, right? And then which exactly item we are going to talk about here. Okay, so we are going to talk about the same item which has a name slice underscore item dot name, right? Because in this collection loop, this slicer, this item will keep on changing, isn't it? So let's say for the first time, if it is Andaman and Nicobar, right? And let's say if these are equal, this is what the user has selected. So immediately the code will go here and, you know, say that, okay, this is selected actually, right? Now, if this is selected, then what we have to do, this is the important thing. Okay, now what we need to do here is that we have to go and select that, but the other items at the same time we have to go and deselect in case if they are not equal. This is the most important line. Okay, so in the else here, what you will do, you will say that, okay, in case if they are not equal, then they has to be false. They should not be selected. This is the point. So this is what exactly we want to do now. Okay, and now this is very simple. I hope you have understood the concept. The only thing now you need to understand before you start selecting and deselecting the things, let's make sure that this slicer has everything selected. So if any of the filter is created here, let's say if I selected this any state here, it should first of all be not available there. I mean, it should be showing me all the items, because then what happens, it may work like a control key that you have selected this item but the other items are also keep on selecting. Now what I'm saying is, now see this is, let me give you the proper practical understanding. Let's go and first of all put the Precode here. Okay, let's see that if we can do this now or not. Now you see, I'm just going to select this Delhi. Okay, the moment I select Delhi, the loop will start working, right? There we go. And now I immediately go and quickly run this F5. Now we want to check what we have in the store. Let's see that first of all. Okay, this is good. So now we are running the loop in this slicer item. Okay, so first item is gonna be Andaman and Nicobar, yes, and which is not equals to Delhi, which you have, you know, retrieved from this slicer. So what happens now, your code should go in the else and it should make that specific item false. Selection should be false, right? So once you're done with this, now again we will start running the loop. Now during this process, you know what is happening, this is deselected, right? Now if this is deselected, so it means that your pivot is updated again. Very important, your pivot is updated here again, right? Because now this pivot will not show you the data of this because this is deselected. But the problem is that because events are very dangerous, you really have to deal with them with a lot of intelligence and delicacy. Now what happened, this event immediately triggered. You see, I'm back here. Ideally I was supposed to move forward, isn't it? Why? Because pivot update happened here, saying that, you know, when you were deselecting the item, pivot update happened again, right? So let me reset the code. Now very important, we want that the moment I have entered this event, my next event should not fire again till the time I don't want it. So here somewhere here we will go and say enable the events. as false. Why? So that when I'm going to my VBA program is going to deselect this specific pivot, this one, right? And the pivot update happens, event should not fire again. Otherwise, every time this keeps on firing, and you will never be able to get out of it, right? That's why we go and say that enable event should be false. This means VBA will not then run the events, but at the same time, when you're done with your code, make sure you put this back into the true mode. Why? Because if you forget to do this, next time whenever you select anything, event will not fire till the time you will not reopen this workbook, because your events are false, so events are not going to run. Okay, that's why when we are done, we will say, okay, we have to now go and make it again true. All right, now let's go again and see that. So now what I do is, again I select Delhi, the same. Let's pass this. There we go. Now you remember enable events is false. Okay, so now the first thing is that our first item is Andamar, which is not equals to Delhi, you know that, right? So what I do is I simply zoom out this so that you can see, right? Okay, this is how it is. Now see, the moment I'm going to have this selection as false, right, what will happen this time, you will not go back into the event because your events are false, right? So you see that I'm still here. Very nice. And this is also not selected. The next time, what is the next item? The next item should be this state, Andhra Pradesh. Again, this is not equals to what you have selected in the other slicer. So this should also go in false. Wow, fantastic. And you see the pivot is also updating accordingly. Now you understood the concept. This line is so important. By chance, if let's say your friend calls you when you're working on this and he says that, okay, let's go and grab the cup of coffee, and you say that, okay, I just want to reset the code and let me just go and come back after a coffee, right? Make sure you remember that your events are false. You have not run this macro completely, so this line you did not run it. So next time when you go and debug the code, when you click here, your event will not fire, and then you will worry what is happening. So make sure you copy this line from here and paste in any module, because in the module I can use F8, right? I can't use the F8 here, isn't it? So just make sure VBA first reads that line, enable event as true, and then you can start working on this. This can happen, so I'm telling you, this is a little soft warning for you. It happened with me when I was learning. Okay, anyways, so now let's go again. So this is the process which is going to repeat. Look at this now. So let's quickly go, and finally we have Delhi, and you see Delhi is selected, right? And the rest are all going to be deselected. Look at this now. So I quickly go and press F8, and I think we are done with this. Oh, amazing. So you have here Delhi, you have Delhi here. Now wait a second. If I go and select the new state here, let's say I go and select Goa, one of my favorite destination, holiday destination, full of beaches. Every year I go there, every year. Okay, I click on Goa. Now the moment I click on the Goa, well, you see all is looking good here because Delhi is off and Goa is selected, right? So now the moment I run this loop, you find here store again is captured as Goa. Correct or not, right? But the point is, so when you go and start running this loop, see what happens. Every item again will be deselected, which is already deselected. Let it be like that. I mean, there's no further changes you will see, right? So once I keep on running this, now see what happens. There we go. You see that? Now what is this? This is Bihar. Okay. This is deselected, and now again I run. This is Chandigarh. This is again deselected, and now this is my another state, Chhattisgarh, which is this. Again, this is deselected, already deselected. That's fine. And now the next is my what? Next is my Delhi, right? Delhi or not? Yeah, Delhi. So it should be deselected. The moment you run this is the problem now. The moment you try to deselect this, which is already selected, because this was selected from the last macro. Remember, so this will select the entire thing, because if you trying to deselect this, your slicer will say, okay, so if everything you want to deselect, I'll select all, isn't it? This is how it happens. So finally, when you're going to run this entire code, this is what will happen. Look at this now. I keep on running. Let me quickly go and press F5. Look at this now. So you won't find the output correct. you don't find the output correct, right? Because you have this Delhi here, and then what happened, you said deselect this. If this has to be deselected, your VB will immediately, pivot will immediately select everything there. So what is the solution here? Now solution is that when you are going to run this loop here, because this is the most important code, this is the most important slicer, because this has to be controlled by this, right? So here what we will do, we will simply say that my slicer should not have anything first of all selected whenever it is going to run. Okay, so here we will write simply that I want all the filters to be clear. Okay, now once you have this line written here, let's again go and click on this. Now again, let's say I run this Andhra Pradesh. Okay, so we now will capture the Andhra Pradesh, and we can see that it's there, it's captured from the above, right? Now I'm going to say that all the slicers, this slicer, all these filters, I want to first of all clear, right? The moment you execute this line, you see you're back on the original slicer, and now your code will start working, because now you have everything selected. All the items which are not part of the first slicer, that will be deselected. Look at this now. Okay, so I've explained you this thing. Now the moment I press F5, you see you won't find any problem, right? Again, let's go and run this again. I go and press, let's say this one, Andaman and Nicobar. Okay, so this is captured. We can see here this is captured. But before you again check that where is the Andaman available in this, you first go and say, okay, the slicer 2 should be completely cleared. Cleared means basically you are clearing the filter, so everything will be selected. Now once again you run the loop, everything is going to look neat and clean. Look at this now, right? Don't worry, this code, you always get this code, right? So as such there is no problem. Okay, you can get this code, you can download this code. The thing is that, so if I remove the break code from here, we are going to see this immediate effect. Let me select this. Look at this now. Wow, let me select this. So that's how you can control these slicers. Now as I said that what if, because right now if you click on this will also trigger the macro, right? And you don't want that. So you can say that in the event, if the pivot table name is 5, this is the pivot table 5, you know that, right? So your target, which is defined as here pivot table class, right? Then that means the target will have a name, a pivot table name. So you simply say that if the target, which is your pivot, because you're using the pivot table class, so you say that if this is equals to my pivot table 5, remember if are case sensitive, okay, in VBA. So if you don't want them to be case sensitive, and in this case I really don't want, I can write in whatever way I want, uppercase, lowercase. So please make sure you go here and write option compare text, right? Option compare text. This I told in my last video as well. So this makes your if functions case insensitive, right? Okay, so finally this is done, and once this is done, so I'm just going to simply say that okay, so this all should run, isn't it? So this all should run, and in case if it is not, then endif. In any case, even should always be true, right? So here I have written else and to do anything, because pivot table, now we can go and quickly give it a try. So what I do, I simply go and put the break code here. Let's see that. So what I do is I simply say that okay, I select this. Now you know that this pivot table has a name which is pivot table 6, which is not equals to this. So you see, wonderful, right? The moment I select this, okay, now this table has a pivot table 5, right? So now the code comes inside this. Now the code will work the way it should work. And look at this now, right? So we have the control here. Look at this now. This is Chandigarh, this is Delhi, this is Goa, and if I try to click here, nothing should happen, isn't it? So if I select, let's say this, now you see this is not changing, right? And this is what we needed it. Well, for now, this is all from me, and I will meet you then very soon in the next video. Thank you so much.